Well, good evening, everyone. This is John Matias, the chair of the Finance Committee for Grand Rapids Public School, and we, I believe, are ready to call order. I don't believe that there's any public comments. And so if we're ready to begin, if we can just quickly introduce ourselves. As I'm looking at Larry, if you can begin and introduce yourself.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I am Larry Oberst, the Chief Financial Officer of the district.
And then I'm looking at Dr. Flores.
Jose Flores, board member.
And also Jen Schottky.
Hi, good evening. Jen Schottky, board member.
And Dr. Baker.
Tony Baker, also board member.
And I do believe, I'm not sure if I'm seeing an interpreter or is that Mr. Long?
Yes, Long Wen, Director in Facilities.
Excellent. All right, I believe that we're ready to begin if you're ready, Larry.
I am ready. We all set to get into the agenda. All right. First item under the action item is our purchasing agenda. And just a few general comments on the agenda. A couple things that we get in the general fund for early childhood programs through Kenner Intermediate School District, which we participate in. And then the IDEX license fee. IDEX is the data analysis software that we license as a district. And actually, we go through the ISD. The ISD gets a better rate because we have a number of local districts that use this data analysis software. Up until the current year, the state provided some funding for that, and then that was eliminated. And so the $30,728 all out of our general fund, but that's a very valuable piece of software. Some of the graphs and information that you have seen as a board in the past comes from that software. Down the other section, we have another fairly large purchase for staff computing devices. We've been buying a lot of those over the last 10, 11 months. A couple major groups had not had their devices upgraded and refreshed, that being the paraprofessionals and the child care workers. And so most of this $505,000 spent for devices will be for those two groups of employees. Some automation adjustments you can see there at a few of the a few of our buildings, and then we're in the process of upgrading fountains in many of our buildings, putting some bottle refill items in there, and that will be funded as well as these items here. All, as you can see, are all funded with the ESSER dollars. Some is old ESSER money. Some will be ESSER 2, and we'll talk a little bit more about ESSER 2 when we get down to the policy section, actually the report section on the COVID-19 funds. That our community health workers from Spectrum Health, item B1 there, $650,000 approximately. That has been funded with our $31A dollars from the state. Some Title II spending on Danielson Academy for professional learning for educators. And then a couple of small bond projects that wind up the purchasing agenda. Security upgrades, key boxes at Congress, Frost, North Park, Willerwood, and then some sound paneling going in at Museum High School. Those are both being funded with bond funds. Questions?
Just if you can clarify in terms of in the supports materials B1 for community mental health workers, can you just elaborate a little bit? Are those folks that are within our schools?
Those are community health workers, not mental health workers or by and large physical health. Yeah, they are the health aides by and large. There are some nurses that staff our health clinics and our health services at our buildings. And they're funded by Section 31A, but provided by Spectrum Health. This has been ongoing, Reverend Matias. We've used this for a number of years, used Spectrum Health under this scenario for a number of years.
Yeah, and it's been very helpful within our schools as students get sick or different. In fact, our community also utilizes some of the health centers that we have within our schools. So that's incredible.
And just me comment, generally we approve this early in the school year, but because we were virtual, as you know, until about a month ago, we did not need to utilize these folks from Spectrum Health. Spectrum Health redeployed them within their health system. And now that we are back in the hybrid method, they are back in our building providing services.
Great. So do we need a motion or shall we?
You do need a motion to approve this and move it on to the full board for their approval, yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve these funds.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
All right, the second item in the action items section of the agenda is a donation of winter coats, mittens, gloves, boots, scarves from lady named Sherry Lynn No to the homeless office here within the district, and those are valued at about $10,000. So I would recommend that the finance committee accept the donation and move it to the full board for their acceptance.
Motion for approval of the donation.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent.
All right, ready to continue on, Reverend Matias?
Yes, you may.
Okay, we're down to the report section. The first being the January 2021 financial statements. I can share my screen, right, Craig? Yeah, looks like I can.
Yeah, great.
Let me pull up. Hang on just a second here.
I don't know if I can.
I think after all these months of being on Zoom meetings, I'd be quicker on the draw on this stuff. Okay. Everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we
I
can.
have the dashboard report up there. Just briefly talk through this. This is through 7 months, so we're more than halfway through our fiscal year.
Mr. Obers, if you can just magnify just a little bit, that would be helpful. I'm sure that we have our copies as well, but great. Thank you.
Better?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Changes from prior months. We have in the 2021 annual budget column here, the revised budget by virtue of Amendment 1 that the board approved earlier this month at their board meeting. So this reflects the new budget that exists after Amendment 1 was approved. And what that did in terms of our fund balance, you can see down here, the fund balance projected now is just under $10 million at 6.7%. Prior to Amendment 1, you may recall that fund balance was right around 4%. As I mentioned earlier, we expect to bring another amendment to the board probably in May, normal time, and that will include other adjustments that will take place between now and then, as well as we believe some additional COVID-19 funds that have currently been approved and potentially some more by virtue of the President Biden's stimulus plan that's making its way through Congress in Washington right now. Other than that, we're tracking about where we would expect to be. If you look at, you may recall some cuts we made in personnel and in areas like that. As you can see, our salaries this year at 34.5 million approximately, compared to last year about 36.7. So we're $2.5 million approximately below where we were a year ago. That reflects some of the cuts we made, some of the open positions that were not filled, have not been filled. We have filled a few of those positions as needed, but we're trying to stick to many of the original cuts we made in the budget. Other than that, we're tracking a good cash position at $33.7 million, as I've mentioned before. A chunk of that related to the fact we got part of our coronavirus relief funds, a $350 per student amount, $5.6 million up front. Much of that's been spent or will be spent here shortly, but that's improved our cash position from where we were a year ago. Year to date through January of this year, we've spent about $120.3 million of the bond funds. And so we'll continue to spend that down to $175 million that was approved by voters a number of years ago. So the details behind this dashboard report is also in your packet as normal for those that like to go back and get into the details, but those are my overall comments on where we stand year to date on the 2021 operations. Any questions I can answer for anybody?
Just in terms of the fund balance, you have it here at 6.7. You're looking at that trending higher.
I would like to think so, Reverend Matias, and I'll talk about that a little bit. We talk about the COVID funds in just a few minutes, but I think we have the ability to for the end of the year, build on that fund balance and maybe get it up to 8% by the end of this fiscal year, which is a good thing. Other questions I can answer? All right, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Long, and he'll make a few comments on the bond construction program, where we stand currently and where we'll be moving here pretty shortly. Long.
Good evening, everyone. Ottawa Hills, we have the hold opens that were installed going into both of the houses. They were just recently inspected last week, and they are in operation now. Now that school's in session, they're working on little issues here and there that we haven't been able to see yet because we haven't been in person as long. So the contractors are coming back and fixing new little items right now. And we're still working on lead submittal and closing out the documents and wrapping up Ottawa Hills. Southwest, we're working on some troubleshooting with some of the mechanical units, the heating system, which is affecting the office right now. So we're working through that. We're trying to get them temp heat while we work out those issues. The waterproofing that still remains for the west foundation wall near the main entrance is going to happen when the weather gets better. And project closeout is ongoing as well. Union, we're about 66% done. We still have an end date of this winter, end of this winter. We just, in another month, we're going to have the science wing finished up. They're working on the media center right now, which is going to finish up in the winter as well. And after the spring, they're going to start working on upstairs in the center of the classrooms. So, and then in the winter or in the fall, we're going to be working on the classrooms closest to the gym area. Secured entries, we have started the design on that. We're working on the Congress, Mulek Park, Shawmut Hills, Kenosha, and North Park. We anticipate getting the design wrapped up and bid out sometime in March so that we can get it constructed during the summer and get it wrapped up before the fall. And then central RFP, we are working on that. We have some meetings this week to finalize that. And then hopefully, depending on the comments, we can hopefully get that wrapped up by, end this week or early next to get that going. If there's any questions.
Any questions?
Long, remind me about the construction schedule for Innovation Central. Are you hoping to begin construction at the end of the school year?
Construction, if everything goes well with RFP, we're hoping to get design and bid out by next January, February, with the construction start of the summer of next year.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
If there are no questions, we can continue.
Thank you, Long. Let me pull up, we're down to the COVID-19 funds update. And let me start with the buckets of COVID dollars we've been working with since, about May of last year. And I think many of you have seen this already or in past meetings. Let me just give you an update where we stand on this. These are the bucket of dollars that have come to us since the initial pandemic hit almost a year ago now. We start with private donations of $1,576,000. This is actually additional amounts that we're looking to raise from private donations. We did raise a significant number, about close to $600,000 early on to help us get some devices into the hands of our students back in April. The state of Michigan had a small allocation of CARES Act dollars, $190,000. That money we got in July state aid payment. Those funds have been spent and we will close out that account. Primarily spent on some health and safety PPE, primarily PPE and cleaning supplies. The ESSER funds, what I'm going to call ESSER 1, because we've got something we're going to call ESSER 2, we'll talk about in a few minutes. ESSER 1 was one of those buckets of dollars that we had to share with the non-publics. Our portion of that was about $7.7 million. That is an application process. We filed actually the initial application, which we got approval back in August. We've also filed an amendment to the application just prior to Christmas, and we got approval on that also. Unlike the bucket of dollars I just talked about from the state of Michigan, the ESSER funds, we an application process, we make the expenditures, then we file for reimbursement from the state of Michigan. We're in the process right now of filing for some reimbursements for technology expenditures. This is also the bucket of dollars where we can use these dollars for anything to maintain the operations of the district and pay our employees and our contractors. So we're moving some of our employee costs, primarily in our security and our MIS group, out of our general fund, and we'll move it into these ESSER funds. They have a spend date, and I forgot to update this, and I apologize. They have a spend date actually of September 30th of 2022 now, 2022. So next September. And we're hoping to have those all spent by the end of our fiscal year in June, so we can close that out, get that behind us. The big bucket of dollars we got from the state, from the CARES Act, was this $350 per student, totaling about $5.4 million. That came in our August state aid payment. That had an initial payment date of spend date of December 30th of 2020. The new Relief Act that was signed just after Christmas extended that spend date until December 30th of this year. And most of these funds are close to, actually they are all spent. I just got an update actually this morning from Rhonda. And we have all these funds allocated and will be actually, cash will actually go out the door here in the next 30 days, and those will be spent and we will close that fund out. Another allocation from the CARES Fund again came through Kent County. We had initial allocation of $236,382. A second allocation, which we got, I think the middle of December, $122,611. These dollars had a spend deadline of December 30th of 2020 last year. That was extended by the new Relief Act, but the county chose not to extend the spend date. So fortunately, we had all that $358,000 spent by December 30th. So we did not lose out on any of those dollars. So those dollars have been spent. We've actually filed the report with Kent County. By the end of, actually it was the end of January. We have not heard anything back from them, which hopefully makes us believe that what we sent them was appropriate. And so that bucket of dollars has been closed out and spent. We're done with. We initially had some reallocation of Title I funds for student and staff hardware devices. That was allowed by the CARES Act. We spent some of that $800,000 on student devices this year. There's still, I believe, about $300,000 of that to be spent. And that is a spend deadline of September 30th of 2022. And then the ESSER Education Equity Fund, another application bucket of dollars that we had to share with the non-publics. Our share of that is about $1.5 million for educational technology and mental health services and support. We are spending that money now. I don't know that we'll have that spent by end of the fiscal year. The deadline for spending it is September 30th of next year of 2022. The last bucket of dollars we got was the GEAR, which is the Governor's Emergency Fund. Again, an application process we have to share with the non-publics. We got about $1.5 million of that. Consider 7 things we could spend that on: connectivity, mental health, learning loss, out of school learning, remote learning, training, teacher curriculum, other health and safety arenas. Some connectivity costs are coming out of that. Some of that, the drinking fountain conversions that you just approved on the purchasing agenda, some of that spending for that is coming out of this bucket of dollars. We have some mental health training and remote learning training that is also coming out of these this particular bucket of dollars also. So we have a September 30th, 2022 deadline to spend that. I don't know that this will look like we'll have this all used up by the end of our fiscal year. But again, we have until September of next year to spend those dollars. So in summary, this
Sorry,
bucket of
Larry,
dollars is spent and
You were
closed
kind of
out.
fading in and out.
Pardon me?
You're fading in and out.
Sorry. In summary, this bucket of dollars, 190, as I mentioned, is spent and closed out. The $350 per student, it will be spent here shortly and closed out. The Kent County CARES Fund allocation has been spent, closed out, and reporting done. And that's where we sit in the current bucket of dollars for COVID-19. Any questions on that, on these particular buckets of dollars and spending?
I do. I'm wondering, Mr. Oberst, if in the last column, the CARES Act, where you have these six categories, where would we see that reported to the board? So for example, out of school learning, would that include suspensions, although we're in this, COVID situation, but,
No, no.
and so also with student mental health, would we see that in academic committee being reported on as far as some of those kinds of details of either how that money was spent or?
You're not, the board's not going to see any specific line item reporting of the money we spend in these. It's in our general ledger system under the particular grants. We have it separately accounted for, obviously, but that all sits in larger financial statement categories, if you will. So, I mean, at some point we can produce a detailed list of the major spending of these buckets of dollars if that's what the finance committee would like to see.
Yeah, just I guess my advice or comment would be that it would be nice to see where programmatically we see that functioning in our district. So, for example, if it's mental health and you're providing training for our counselors or whatnot, how that sifts through. Obviously, the dollar amount is being reported, but programmatically, making sure that we're seeing that in how we're meeting student needs or teacher training and curriculum towards health, whatever those arenas are. And so that kind of thing is what I'm just.
Yeah, like I mentioned, we can provide a supplemental list of the major spending areas for each of these buckets
Great,
for a future meeting. Okay.
great.
I would like to compliment you though on providing this detail. I really like the columns. I went through it earlier in great detail, and it was very, very specific, and it does give us great insight as to those buckets, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Dr. Flores. Other questions? One final comment to make on this. We certainly appreciate this financial assistance. We couldn't do what we've been able to do the last year without it. But I will tell you, it has been a significant effort to account for this because we have to keep all these buckets separate, and they have different, as you can see, different areas we can spend the money on, and we have to report it specific to the particular bucket of dollars. And that's, we're running the business office because of budget cuts. We're running 2 FTE short. So it's, it's been challenging, which is why we're trying to get these dollars closed out by the end of our fiscal year. As I mentioned, we'll probably have most of the big ones closed out because, let me get something else up here, because we have another round of funding by virtue of the coronavirus aid bill that was signed into law on December 27th of last year. Let me talk a little bit about this. There is available to us $39.1 million. $34 million comes from 100% from the COVID relief bill. We're calling that ESSER 2. And ESSER is $1.6 billion was allocated to the state of Michigan. Like ESSER 1, the state of Michigan had the option, which they exercised, to retain 10% of that $1.6 million to use for specific purposes that they deem appropriate. The other 90% is allocated to all local districts based on basically a free and reduced lunch count, Title I count, if you will. Unlike ESSER 1, we do not have to share the $34 million with any non-public. There is a separate allocation from that new bill dedicated to the non-public. So we get $34 million. Some of the same spending, general spending areas that we had in ESSER 1, we have in ESSER 2. One new area that was pretty specific it's actually in the legislation, is that we can spend these ESSER 2 dollars on any replacement, repair, upgrade of ventilation systems, HVAC systems, to make our buildings safer. As I go through this in a minute, you'll see we going to use some of these dollars to do just that. As you may recall from earlier in the year, we did the ventilation audit. We have essentially 8 buildings that don't have much ventilation because of their age, and we acquired a number of room ventilation units to mitigate that particular issue. ESSER dollars gives us some money to do some permanent fixes on some of these buildings. Then we have an additional $5.1 million from the governor's COVID relief. This was announced, I think, about a month ago. What the governor did is she took part of this 10% of the ESSER funds I just mentioned. She added $300 million from the school aid fund and allocated that out based on 50% of your special ed count and 50% of general ed count. And that amounts to about $5.1 million. Now, the challenge right now is that these dollars are to be allocated through a 2021 supplemental. And that's what's being held up right now in Lansing because the legislature wants more control over what's getting shut down and what's staying open, the governor through her health department orders. And so right now, even though the money got to the state, was supposed to get to the state by the end of January, we have yet to get any guidance from MDE. No, there's been no application open yet to apply for this money. And at this point, we're not sure when the money is going to be available for local districts to access it via the application process. What we heard just recently now was maybe next week. But I don't know that for sure. But in the meantime, what we've done is we've had a small subgroup put together really since last August to work on the first round of funding COVID-19. That group's been extended to look at areas we could spend ESSER 2. Now, this is just based on general guidelines we've gotten so far. Much like ESSER 1, ESSER 2 also has the last area of expenditure states the same thing as ESSER 1 stated, that we can spend it on to maintain the operations of the district and pay our employees and our contractors. So that kind of gives us carte blanche to spend it on normal operating areas too, and provide some relief to our general fund and more importantly to our fund balance. So we split up the dollar, and there were some other general guidelines, both in the legislation itself and also that came down from MDE early on when they announced this money was going to be available. Some areas they'd like to see local districts spend these new funds. A lot of it has to do with learning loss assessment remediation. So we put together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 major areas of spending of these dollars with approximate budgets so far. And we've met, and let me just briefly go over what we have come up with so far. The first is the academic area. Ron Gorman is the team leader on that. Areas to address is learning loss assessment and remediation, additional curriculum needs, additional supports for ESL, after school programs, expanded after school programs, summer school programs expansion, expanded resources for arts and phys ed, which have by and large, not much has been spent on those two areas. Potentially tutor programs, additional pre-K programs and supports. Those are general areas. Ron's group has gotten together and has put some more specific areas that we are still discussing right now. And again, it's dependent upon what the ultimate guidelines are. We're allocating somewhere between about $7 million. It looks like it may be closer to $7.5 million. The spending guideline for all this money, or the spending deadline for all this money, is really from now through September 30th of 2023. September 30th of 2023. So that's 2.5 years. And that actually spans 4 of the district's fiscal years. 4 of the district's fiscal years. So as these various groups looked at areas to spend these dollars, we also asked them to come up with timelines of spending that. Obviously we're going to need a lot up front. Let's look down the road too, because one thing that we found out this past year, and as board members, you know this, is we've done so much planning and try to anticipate everything we can, but things come up you can't anticipate. Every day, every week, we have new challenges we have to address. And so we don't want to spend all this $39.1 million within the first year and not have anything left in year 2, 3, and 4 for things that may come up. One thing we do know, in the educators on this committee know this too, is that this learning loss that our students have experienced is not going to go away in 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 12 months. It's probably 2 to 3 years to catch these kids back up. Would you agree, Dr. Flores? Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there we need to be very innovative in targeting our resources and our instructional remediation efforts to make sure that all kids are back on grade level here as they should be and competent.
Absolutely. And that was part of our directions to all these committees, is think outside the box.
Right.
Because these dollars, there's pretty much no restrictions. These dollars also do not have the supplement versus supplant restrictions that the title dollars do. So we really can spend it on anything that we deem appropriate and that we believe can achieve the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Second area is more specific to special ed and any specific needs that the special ed programs might need. Now, again, you're going to see as I talk through this that all 7 of these areas will overlap to some extent. Some of these areas in the academic in terms of learning loss also apply to our special ed students. We've allocated about $700,000 to even more specific needs that special ed students may have. And Laura and her team is working on that. Again, the same spending deadline, September 2023. As much as money as we spend on technology, we still have additional technology needs. And those needs now are more specific to being back in the classrooms. Throughout our district, we have a wide variety of classroom technology needs. Obviously, some of our newer buildings or newer renovated buildings have upgraded in-classroom technology. Many of our older buildings, or those that have not been renovated in a period of time, have in-room technology that needs to be upgraded. So it's going to focus on that. We also know that there are 2 major groups, and you approved technology expenditure just a few minutes ago on the purchasing agenda at $505,000 I mentioned for paraprofessionals and childcare workers. Some of those needs will come out of this bucket of dollars. We've allocated about $2 million. Craig has gone through initially and come up with a lot more than that, and he's going to whittle it down on a priority basis. But we've spent a lot on technology already, as you know, probably close to $5 or $6 million already to get us one-to-one and the other needs, connectivity, all those kinds of things. In the facilities and operations area, we have the same ability to buy additional PPE, cleaning, disinfecting supplies and equipment. I will tell you that we've spent a lot on that. We had a lot of PPE donated to us. I think our needs going forward in those arenas will clearly not be as significant as they have been. Presumably, as the virus gets under control, we achieve herd immunity. There'll be less need for PPE and some of the specialized cleaning that takes place. Nonetheless, there are some dollars available for that. But our real focus, and you can see the budget amount here is almost $16 million, is to work on some of the ventilation needs of our buildings. We also have, and I think we mentioned maybe back in the work session in December, we talked about facilities, some other health and safety needs of our buildings. We don't have bond funds for, we can use some of these dollars for that. And then transportation equipment, primarily some of our grounds maintenance equipment and our trucks that primarily we use for snow removal purposes are pretty beat up. And the only source we have to buy new vehicles is our general fund. We can't even use bond dollars to buy vehicles. So this is an opportunity to replace some of those vehicles that we need to do. Larry Johnson is head of that team, and he is working to determine where specifically to put those dollars. And you'll see more detail as time goes on via the purchasing agenda in this particular area. We have an area of health, mental health, and social emotional. Team leader is Mel Atkins, assisted obviously by by Kim Behrens, our health director, student health director. Dollars to any additional physical and mental health needs and services for our students, social emotional needs of students, mental health needs of staff, and potentially additional health needs of parents and guardians. Again, we're waiting for more specific guidance on that. We've allocated $2.5 million in that area of the $39.1 million. And then we continue to have additional professional development needs that go beyond our Title II dollars that fund many of our professional development needs. Some of the areas of professional development relate to, again, hybrid learning, continued use of technology in the classroom, use of new curriculum, use of new online tools, staff development related to health and safety protocols, and any other areas to be determined by Eric and his team for professional development. Again, you can see there's some spillover between professional development and back here, the academic and special ed arena. Some of the needs and spending here relate to PD also. But there's another $300,000 for professional development. Then the last bucket is an ability, hopefully, to reallocate, redeploy, if you will, general fund dollars over the next 4 fiscal years, take them out of the general fund and fund them with these dollars. This is a unique opportunity for us to hopefully be able to build some fund balance and not have to go through those significant and gut-wrenching cuts we had to make last June, the almost $11 million that we had to come up with because of the financial emergency. So we'd like to build some fund balance. So if something like this occurs in the near future, we have some fund balance and the cuts don't need to be as deep and as painful. We'd like to get $11 million out of it over the next few years. Rhonda in the business office are looking at particular areas that have some connection with the COVID-19. Some of the things we've talked about so far, just to let you know, is some of our transportation needs to spend out of here. As you may recall, over the last 4 years now, we've acquired new, upgraded, very robust curriculums in science, in ELA, in math, and this year in social studies. The social studies we actually funded with one of the earlier buckets of dollars. With the other 3 curriculums, we were paying for it over a period of anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And we have a couple of years left on some of those. So we're looking at potentially, and those dollars come out of the general fund. So redeploying general fund dollars for the curriculum that we still have to pay for and pay for them out of here. Obviously, our first priority is these first 6 areas. But again, we'd like to get $10 to $11 million into our fund balance over the next 4 fiscal years with these dollars. That's where our thinking sits right now with what we're going to call this ESSER 2. Okay, ESSER 2 is what this funding buckets are we're talking about here, ESSER 2. Questions, comments? I will continue to give this committee updates as time goes on. But like I said, we're still waiting for more specific guidance from the state. And we may have an additional, the Biden stimulus plan, I'm going to call it, could have anywhere from 60 to $90 million that would be available to just our district. And actually, as we've talked about, and we'll hear shortly, as a cabinet start talking about if we had 60 or $90 million, where some of the areas we could spend those dollars. Again, thinking outside the box. And so we're going to start working on that preliminarily, because as you can well imagine, with those kinds of dollars, if that would occur, be a lot of scrutiny and accountability. And no longer could we say as a district, well, we can't do it because we don't have the money to do it, because we're going to have the money if that comes to fruition. So, but that has a little way to go yet in Washington. And I'd be satisfied right now with just getting the ESSER 2 dollars allocated to us and applied for and get those moving, because some of these things, and actually we're moving on some of the areas right now as it relates to these after school programs and a more robust summer school program, because that takes some planning. Again, the dollars have been allocated, the ESSER 2 dollars are from the federal government. We haven't applied for them yet. They can't keep it from us. We have enough cash, as you saw earlier in the financial statements I talked about, that we can start funding some of this planning time. And then ultimately, when the ESSER 2 dollars become available, we will just reimburse, if you will, these other funds with ESSER.
Yeah, it just, you kind of faded out again, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have, some of these academic programs, the ESSER 2 I mentioned earlier, especially like some after-school programs, tutor programs, summer school, a more robust summer school program. And we know we need to start planning that in those programs now and looking at those programs now, even though we don't have the money in or allocated yet or even available for us to apply for, but we have enough cash that we can start the planning process, which we need to do right now. And then we will reimburse ourselves, if you will, when those ESSER 2 dollars become available to us.
Yeah, my hope is that, again, we continue to see reporting on these. It sounds like it's opportunities for us to get ahead of the game with areas that we perhaps lacked in mental health and some of these other areas, that maybe this gives us really an opportunity, as you were saying, to think outside the box. And Dr. Flores was alluding to some scrutiny to how we are getting our kids really back on track.
Right.
Um, you know, and really thinking through what that looks like, and encouraging, exciting our teachers if they're going to have the resources to be able to do those things. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions on ESER 2? All right, thank you. I think one more item I see in the agenda is the policy, and just a brief summary of the governor's 21-22 budget proposal that came out, I think, was it a week before last. And I know John has sent you maybe a couple summaries, and there's actually a summary in your Finance Committee material. Just a couple of highlights that were positive. It's really a good budget, and we appreciate it. The January Revenue Consensus Estimating Conference, as you may recall, painted a much brighter picture for the remainder of the 2021 year and into the 21-22 year. So the governor's proposal increases a foundation allowance by $164 for us, which would get us to $8,275 per student. Foundation allowance, about 2%, 2% increase, which is a positive. She also included additional funding for special ed, about a 2% increase in special ed dollars, about a 2% increase in ESL funding, and 31A at-risk dollars for us, which is positive. The one change that likely or could likely have a negative, maybe significant negative impact on our revenue for next year is the blended count. As you may recall, this year they went to a super blend, which mitigated the impact of our 800 plus student loss. Ultimately, the reduced revenue was about 1.3 million this year as compared to what it could have been in the neighborhood, I think 7 or 8 million. Next year, her proposal would go back to a 90-10 blend. However, she's also provided a $200 million bucket of dollars for those districts that, going back to the 90-10 blend, would have fewer students than the super blend this year. And if we don't get back a significant number of our 800 plus students we lost, that will be us. The 200 million bucket that she's proposing would fund up to 70% of that loss in revenue, if you will. I did a calculation based on some estimates that I shared with the cabinet already. If we do not get those significant amount of 800 plus students we lost back, we could have a gross loss in revenue of almost $11 million. And as compared to this year. And if that $200 million would reimburse 70% of that, that would still be a loss of about 3.3 million in revenues compared to this year. Now, if more districts need more than $200 million in total, then that $200 million does not increase, but the percentage is reduced proportionately. So instead of 70%, it may be 60% or 50%. Keep in mind that vast majority of the districts statewide saw a reduction in enrollment in the 2021 years compared to the 19-20 year. So that bogey is out there, which is why it's important for us to try to get those students back for next year. Continues to fund the MIPSERS program. That funding will be up to about $1.6 billion in total. Additional money for the preschool program. The Great Start Readiness Program hasn't seen an increase in their slot allotment for a number of years. And that's going to be increased under her proposal from, we find it here, by $1,025 per student. Based on our current number of slots for GSRP, that could be an additional $1.4 million next year for our GSRP program here in Grand Rapids. She continues funding for literacy coaches, which we have 4 of those through the ISD. Actually, that funding goes to the ISD, and the ISD then passes it through to us. That's funded 4 literacy coaches that we currently have working in the district, and those dollars will continue into next year. And some early literacy grants continue this year also. So those are some of the major pluses, if you will, in the governor's school aid budget. As you know, this is just the first part of the whole process. The House and the Senate will weigh in with their budgets, I think, within the next couple of weeks here. And then the negotiation will start. No final decisions will be made until after the revenue estimating conference that takes place mid-May. We are hoping, and we've communicated this through our lobbyists, and you heard that today for those that dialed into the legislative lunch. We like to have a budget by June 1st. You know, we can't have another year like last year where it was, you know, you were approving a budget on June 29th, but the state budget wasn't finalized till September 29th, I think, because they had to have it in place by October 1st. So, but who knows, right? Who knows? So that's, and you know, as I mentioned, I know you've gotten some material in the last couple of weeks on the governor's budget. So any questions I can answer on that, on the governor's budget?
Good.
Great. I think I am done talking, Reverend Matthias.
All right. If there are no any public comments, I don't see any. I don't see any hands raised.